I'm Liddy, host of the true crime channel Beneath the Sandalwood Tree. So here's a question that will not let you sleep. How can a man who drove a truck through quiet villages also drive 5 young lives off the road into a dark bargain with death? Justine's Tanem, a name that sounds ordinary until you learn what it hid, used a Facebook alias to promise work and wages, then turned those promises into a 5-month spree of sexual violence. 5 girls were raped, and 2, Yuliani Welkis and Marsela Bajes, were stabbed to death and, grotesquely, their bodies violated after death. The facts are blunt. The outrage is simple, and the community that raised those girls is left to answer how trust was turned into a trap.
Tines was 41 years old enough to remember another world, young enough to believe he still had time. Born in Camp Long 2, a village stitched into the dry, red dirt of Kupang Regency, he was more than a name, a husband, father of 3, a truck driver whose wheels carried goods and whose lies carried pain. Think about Marsela, with her future she hoped to build, or Yuliani, who left home with hope in her pocket, both trusting enough to take his offer. Through simple betrayals, he destroyed what mattered. Through violence, he silenced voices that once sang. A man with a family, a face, a home. And yet, in a single terrible span of months, he became the engineer of grief.
Marsela Bajes should have been just another schoolgirl in her second year at West Kupang State High, chasing dreams no bigger than grades, friends, and the steady rhythm of tending her family's 2 cows after online classes. But on February 24th, 2021, in Onasu village, that ordinary day fractured. A girl who left home in the afternoon to follow her father's request never came back. Instead, her body was found in the damp brush the next morning. Clothes torn, skin marked with bruises and stab wounds that spoke of a fight she never agreed to. Marsela wasn't a name in a police file. She was the daughter who helped with chores, the neighbor kids waved at, the girl her mother trusted to return before dark. And in one night, that trust, that routine, was gutted by a man who promised nothing and delivered terror.
Yuliani Welkis carried her family's hopes like a folded letter in her pocket. A fresh graduate from a vocational school in 2020, a daughter from Tuasane Hamlet in Noel Mina village who left the dust of Takari district behind to chase work in Kupang City. On February 14th, 2022, while the rest of the world traded flowers and candy, she walked into a meeting she thought might open doors to a better life. Instead, she met Tines. By nightfall, the promise of a job had curdled into horror. She was dragged into the shadows, raped, stabbed, and discarded in a patch of forest where the silence spoke louder than screams. Yuliani wasn't a statistic. She was a young woman trying to help her parents climb out of poverty, a girl whose journey for work ended as a warning written in blood.
He called himself Ari Tio on Facebook, a fake name with the shine of opportunity glued to it. For Yuliani, scrolling through messages in a rented room in Kupang, it looked like the start of something real, a steady job, a salary big enough to lift her family out of the tight grip of poverty. The man behind the screen was Justinus Tenam, a 41-year-old truck driver with a wife and 3 children, who dressed his trap in promises she was too kind to doubt. When she stepped out to meet him that February afternoon, she wasn't walking into danger. Not in her mind. She was walking toward hope. But the hope wasn't hers to keep. It belonged to a predator who had already chosen the ending. It began like too many traps do, with a simple post in a Facebook group, Job Vacancies in Kupang City, on May 10th, 2021. A man calling himself RETO dangled the bait. A sales job, 1,250,000 rupiah a month. The kind of number that could look like a lifeline to someone fresh out of school. 35 people bit, all with questions, all hoping. Among them was a young woman using the screen name Yani Ariani, but to her family, she was Yuliani, the girl who carried her parents' quiet dreams to the city. She typed one line asking if the vacancy was still open, and in a few cold strokes of the keyboard, Tinus answered, yes. It was the kind of exchange that should have led to a paycheck, maybe a uniform, maybe even a future. Instead, it was the first breadcrumb on a trail that led straight into the forest and straight into his hands. By May 11th, 2021, the hook was already in. Yuliani, still hopeful, sent a private message to RETO asking for a phone number so she could get something solid, a voice on the other end, a promise made firmer than a typed reply. Tinus handed over the digits like a man passing out candy, and from there the conversation shifted gears. The texts turned into calls, the calls into a steady rhythm of reassurance. The job was real. The salary was waiting. The door was open if only she would step through. To Yuliani, it felt like progress, the beginning of work, maybe independence. To Tinus, it was the beginning of a countdown. Each ring of the phone, ticking her closer to the moment she would walk into a trap designed just for her. By Friday, May 14th, 2021, the deal had been sealed in words and trust. Yuliani agreed to meet Tinus in Kupang, the city she believed held the key to her family's better tomorrow. She told herself it was just a conversation about work, nothing more dangerous than questions and answers. The meeting was set like any other job appointment. A date circled quietly in her mind, a step toward independence. She left her boarding house with hope in her bag and determination in her stride, not knowing that the man she was about to meet wasn't an employer, but an executioner, and that the promise of a salary was just the paper wrapping on a coffin. He had the blade wrapped in a handkerchief, its edge a dull, purposeful gleam against the gray Kupang sky. It wasn't about the job, not really. Tinus had made the trip from Kemp long before, but this time felt different. A knot in his gut that wasn't from bus ride. He had a picture of her in his mind, Yuliana, a girl with a face like a forgotten song, a laugh that was supposed to be as bright as the midday sun over the Timor Sea. The knife was for self-defense, a phrase that sounded hollow even in his own thoughts. He wasn't afraid of her, not in the way he'd be afraid of a street thug. He was afraid of the look in her eyes when she finally understood, a look that would make him the villain in a story he hadn't meant to write. Yuliani left the small, cluttered room in Fatululi, the afternoon sun a hot weight on her shoulders, the air thick with the smell of dust and the distant sea. She wasn't carrying much, just her purse and the memory of a phone call that had promised something she couldn't quite name. She had a simple hope of her own, a promise of something solid in a life that had been anything but. She walked towards the meeting place with a practiced caution, a woman who knew the world wasn't giving out free rides, but still hoped this one would be different. The motorbike rumbled beneath him, a cheap, borrowed thing from a friend named Dowd. Tinas had left Camp Long behind, the dust and the quiet fields, for the humid, congested air of Kupang. The sun, a brutal eye in the sky, was beginning its slow descent, painting the tin roofs of the city a tired gold. He navigated the crowded streets, the noise of motorbikes and 1,000 voices a dull roar in his head. The weight in his pocket felt heavier now, no longer just a piece of metal, but a sealed deal with the devil. He spotted her standing by the roadside, a splash of color against the drab concrete. She looked smaller than he remembered, and there was a nervous, bird-like quality to the way her eyes darted from side to side, a silent plea for a world that was a little less harsh. He felt a fleeting, ugly thing in his gut, a mix of pity and a cold brow. But it was gone in a moment, swept away by the same tide that had carried him and his secret to this street corner. He saw her before the text came in, a flash of black and white stripes by the gas pumps, standing out against the backdrop of idling motorbikes and the smell of spilled gasoline. He tapped out the message, a stupid formality in a city of millions. Miss the one wearing the black and white striped t-shirt? Her reply, a simple yes, felt like a key turning in a lock, sealing a deal neither of them had fully understood. He pulled up beside her, the cheap engine coughing a little. She got on without a word, her movements quick and efficient, like a woman who knew how to get things done, but was used to doing them alone. As she settled in behind him, he could smell the faint scent of something clean and floral, a stark contrast to the grit and exhaust fumes of the city, a tiny detail that reminded him she was a person, not just a name from a phone call, not just a problem he was riding towards. They rode in silence, the miles blurring beneath them, the city's sprawl giving way to the open road that led to Balak. The wind whipped at Yuliana's hair, a small rebellion against the stillness of the afternoon. She could feel the hard lines of his body through his shirt, a strange combination of strength and a rigidity that felt like a wall. The sun had lost its initial bite, casting long shadows that made the roadside trees look like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky, in a world that was suddenly too fast, too quiet, and moving in a direction she hadn't quite signed up for. The motorcycle sputtered to a halt by a small, unremarkable river, a ribbon of murky water cutting through the tall, dry grass of the Batakde area. The air hung heavy and still, a different kind of silence than the open road had offered. Yuliana slid off the bike, her feet finding the uneven ground, the small, familiar weight of her charm bracelet, a steady presence against her wrist. The sun, now low on the horizon, cast long, distorted shadows of her and the motorcycle across the field. She looked at Tinas as he killed the engine, the stillness of his movements feeling more unnerving than his previous speed. When he spoke, his voice was low, and his words were about going to a friend's house, a simple, logical request that didn't fit the uneasy feeling now sailing in her gut. She agreed, of course. She had no other choice, a truth that she knew in the way a trapped animal knows the feel of a closing door. She began to walk with him, the tall grass whispering against her legs, the quiet hum of a distant insect the only sound to accompany them.
He led the way along a white dirt track, a faint scar running through the field of thorny weeds. The setting sun painted a long shadow of Tanas in front of her, a dark, silent guide on a road that didn't feel like it was going anywhere good. The air grew cooler, and the chirping of crickets was starting up, a sound that in other places might have been peaceful, but here felt like a slow, deliberate countdown. Yuliani kept her eyes on the ground, on the cracked, white earth and the stubborn weeds that fought their way through it. She saw a single, vibrant pink flower, a small, defiant burst of color that had somehow managed to survive. She reached down, almost instinctively, and picked it. Its stem was surprisingly tough, and the petals felt delicate against her fingertips. A small piece of beauty she could hold on to as she walked into the unknown. He took a sharp turn off the main track, following a smaller path that snaked into the taller grass. And Yuliana's voice, a small, questioning sound, came from behind him. "Where are we going?" she asked, the question as quiet and fragile as the flower in her hand. He didn't turn around. "A shortcut," he said, the lie feeling as dry as the air in his lungs. The path ended at a small, muddy stream, a trickle of water lost in a sea of wild reeds. It was a place for things to disappear. He stopped, and the silence swallowed them whole. "You walk in front," he said, the words stripped of any politeness. She hesitated, a small, stubborn refusal in the slump of her shoulders, a silent plea for a different ending. The defiance was a brief, heartbreaking flash before he persisted and she finally gave in. She led the way through the tall grass, the dry, whispery stalks a wall on either side of her, and he followed, his footsteps a quiet echo of hers. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and something else, something she couldn't name. Her small, fragile flower still in her hand. Suddenly, his hand was on her arm, a grip that was less a touch and more a claim. The small, quiet hope she had been holding on to shattered like glass. The words he spoke were low and ugly, a demand stripped of any pretense, a violation laid out in the open air. The silent world around them seemed to hold its breath. She refused, the word a small, desperate gasp that was all she had left. A final, defiant act of a woman who knew the end was coming, but wasn't going to make it easy. She struggled, her refusal turning into a desperate, frantic fight against his grip, and the small, delicate flower she held fell to the ground, a single spot of pink in the dry, brown grass. That's when the glint of metal appeared. He pulled the knife from his waist, the blade a stark, ugly flash in the dying light, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence she never wanted to read. It wasn't about sex anymore. It was about something colder,
something more final. The world narrowed to just the two of them, the quiet hum of the insects, the rustle of the grass, and the terrible silence between a man with a knife and a woman whose last, desperate hold on hope was now gone.
She made a desperate grab for the blade, a final, futile attempt to take control of a story that was already written. Her hands, which had held a small, defiant flower just moments before, closed on the cold steel, and the cut was a small, sharp burn that she didn't have time to feel. The first blow came fast, a brutal, deliberate thrust to the throat that was meant to silence her for good. Then came another, a sickening, wet sound as the blade found her chest and the light in her eyes went out. The world went dark for her. The rustle of the grass, the sound of the wind, the scent of the dry earth, all of it gone. But for him, the world kept turning, the sun kept setting, and he went about his business, a man alone in a field with nothing left but a body and a knife. He raped her corpse. He finished what he started. The dry grass, a crumpled mattress beneath him, the scent of fresh blood now part of the landscape. When he was done, he got to his feet, a man leaving a job site. He patted down Yuliana's pockets, his fingers searching for a prize. He found her purse, and inside a crumpled 100,000 rupiah note and her phone. A cheap plastic thing that now held all the silent secrets of her short life. He took them both. She wasn't a person anymore, just a statistic, a problem solved. He left her there, a body without a name, a story without an ending, a final, unceremonious act of a man satisfied with his animal lust. Ari and Danny came to the field on Monday. A couple of men with measuring tapes and blueprints, their heads full of numbers and plots of land. The sun was hot and bright, the dry grass whispering under their boots. They were mapping out a future, a new project for some company. Their work as cold and impersonal as a surveyor's chain. The air smelled of dust and heat, and the faint, sweet scent of some wildflower. They walked the ground, calling out measurements to each other, a simple, methodical rhythm that was as old as time. Neither of them was looking for anything else. Not really, just the edges of the property, the lay of the land, the way the shadows fell. But the field had a secret, a quiet, terrible thing that had been waiting 3 days for someone to find it. They found her by the riverbed, a still, dark shape in the tall grass. The scent hit them first. Something wrong, something sweet and rotten on the warm, humid air. It didn't belong with the dust and the dry weeds. As they got closer, the shape resolved itself into a body. The fabric of her shirt faded and stained. The small, quiet details of her life, now gone to rot. Ari and Donnie looked at each other, their work forgotten, the blueprints and measuring tapes suddenly meaningless. They didn't need to discuss it. The world they had come to measure and map out was now a crime scene. They turned and walked back the way they came. Two men who had gone looking for a piece of land and found a piece of a life instead. They walked fast, their boots kicking up the dust. The only thing on their minds now, a small, white building with a flag out front and a phone on the wall. They had a story to tell, and it was going to be a bad one. They need to tell the police.
They came and they went, the white-coated men and the uniformed cops, picking over the pieces of a story they were too late to hear. The body was a fact, a piece of evidence, a sad little statistic to be entered into a ledger. The death certificate, a dry piece of paper signed in a quiet office somewhere, made it official. Yuliani Welkes, dead on May 14th, 2021, in a field outside Batakte. It didn't mention the sun on her face or the small, defiant pink flower she'd picked just before the end. It just said she was dead. But the field still held her story, whispered on the wind that rustled through the tall weeds, a story that was a whole lot messier than a certificate could ever tell. That was the end of Yuliana's story. Just the name on a piece of paper, a body in a field, a case waiting for someone to put the pieces together. The world didn't stop. The sun kept setting, the tides kept turning, and the grass in the field grew back, covering up the ugly parts, the way time does. But the story didn't end there. Not for Tinus. He had his 100,000 rupiah and his cheap cell phone, a couple of trinkets that were supposed to make him a free man. But a man can't outrun what he leaves behind. He can ride a borrowed motorbike across the country, he can bury the knife in the mud, but he'll still be looking over his shoulder, still jumping at shadows, still hearing the rustle of the tall grass on a warm afternoon. He thought he was a ghost, a phantom in the night, but the world had a way of collecting its debts, and Tinus was about to find out just how heavy that debt was. His story wasn't over. Not yet. It was just a little while longer before he ran into a dead end of his own. His escape, a desperate flight across the island, would be a short one. His story, a final bloody chapter, will be told in the next video, where he meets the kind of end a man like him deserves. Remember, the quiet places often hide the loudest crimes. In the darkest corners where greed and a lack of empathy fester, the real monsters are born. We bring you these stories so that the victims are not forgotten, and so that their names, like Yuliana's, are spoken with the respect they were denied in life. If you found this case as unsettling as we did, please like and share this video to spread awareness. Subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below with your thoughts on this tragic case. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these injustices and ensure that justice, in some form, is always served.